Thank you. All right. All right. Well, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Happy Tuesday. This is the last Tuesday in April. Oh my gosh, this year is already flying by. So, welcome to your project call for April of 2023. I believe this is our WHO Cohort 3 group. So, welcome to your new grant. And we are going to jump right in. And we'll start with taking a quick look at our agenda. I think this will be a pretty quick meeting overall. We're going to have, we'll introduce the ARG team again. Casey is going to talk to you a little bit about the QPR, and I think she's going to have a few words about your LEP. Danny's going to give us some updates on indirect cost and how to track and document those. I am going to talk a little bit about enrolling participants across multiple ARG projects and what that should look like. And then I have a couple of housekeeping things I'm going to carry with us. The one that says grant administration, we're going to strike through that. I forgot to remove it from my PowerPoint, but we'll strike through that. We are not going to cover grant administration today. Okay, so your ARG team this morning. Again, those of you who are just now checking in, make sure that you put your first and last name in Zoom, your organization, and your ARG project role. For the BSCC team, we'll start with Adriana. Good morning, Adriana.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to see you all. Happy to.
Oh, we can barely hear you.
Everyone, happy to see you guys.
All using the same microphone in here. So I'm sorry if you can't hear us. I kind of took over the microphone since I'm going to be presenting, but.
Thank you. Gotcha. Appreciate it. Thanks, Danny. Damon Hickman.
Thanks, Tanya. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. And once again, congratulations on your awards and welcome to Team ARG.
Awesome. Thank you, Damon. Candace Kiefhofer is also a program analyst with ARG. She is not on this call with us today. Natalia Camlon.
Good morning, everyone, and I'm your Cohort 3 analyst, and happy to see you all on camera, and thank you for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Natalia. Danielle Feist.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm a staff services manager here with the Board of State and Community Corrections, so I oversee the program analyst roles. So you might be seeing me sometime soon, checking in on contracting or with invoicing, but you'll mostly be working as well for right now with Natalia. But good morning and thank you for attending today.
Awesome. Thank you, Danny. We also have Casey Warmuth, our Chief of Research. Casey.
Hi there, welcome everyone, and I'm Casey Warmuth, as Tanya said, and I'll be working with you all on your QPRs and local evaluation plans.
Thank you, Casey. And I have got to just give ourselves a huge plug, how grateful I am to have Casey. I want to point out she is our Chief of Research, and we typically don't get lucky enough to have the Chief of Research working directly on our grants. So I am really thrilled that we have Casey supporting us right now. So we want to suck up all that good knowledge that she can share with us while we have her. So just know that you are being very well taken care of with our research and data collection. So thank you so much, Casey. And then, of course, you have me. I am Tanya Thompson, your field rep. So we're going to get started today, and I am going to turn it right over to Casey, who is going to talk about the QPR. Casey, it's all yours.
Alrighty, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Bear with me here. And what you all should be able to see right now is a portion of your quarterly progress report. This is for the WHO grantees. And what I'd like to do today with you all is review some areas of the QPRs where we tend to have questions for grantees or questions have come to us from grantees about the intent of sections or how to fill it out. So as a preemptive measure, as you all are working on your Q1 and Q2 QPRs, we're going to give you a brief refresher here today on some of the key areas where we've seen the most questions. Okay, so the first section that I'd like to discuss with you is Section A, which is titled Project Description. And within this section, you tell us a lot about the evidence-based practices you're using, whether your project is an expansion, and what risk or needs assessment tools you use. So focusing on this second question, the intent of this question is to find out if you are using a validated criminogenic risk needs assessment tool. So examples of these include the Ohio Risk Assessment System, which is referred to as the ORAS, or the Level of Service Case Management Inventory, which is the LSCMI for short. So those are just two specific examples. There are many others, but just to say this is solely referring to validated criminogenic risk needs assessment tools. So if you are using one of those, you can use this drop-down menu to select yes. If not, you can select no. And either way, we would like you to give us a description either of that assessment tool that you're using or any other assessment tool that you're using to determine participants' needs. So it's not a requirement of the grant that you use a criminogenic risk needs assessment tool. You could be using other tools that are appropriate for your program. And if that's the case, the answer would be no. And then you would just use this text box to describe to us what you are using. So, and I forgot to mention that I don't want this just to be me up here talking. If you have questions as I'm reviewing a specific section, feel free to raise your hand or type it into chat. You can just make sure you put requests in all caps so that we can scroll through there quickly and identify the questions. So I'll pause one moment. Maybe Natalia can tell me if there are any questions in chat specific about risk need assessment tool. I don't see any. Okay.
Not yet, Casey.
All right, so we'll move on. Another critical feature here in this section A, I'm going to scroll down here to question 5, which is about participant success definition. And this is where we want you to describe a measurable milestone that your project uses to determine when an individual has successfully completed service. So this is not BSCC defined. This will be specific to your project and your goals. And this is the definition that you'll use when completing section H, which asks about individuals who are exiting your program. And we also have you report outcomes for those who successfully completed your program. So this will become critical when you start reporting outcomes for individuals. But just to give you some examples of definitions of success, we do want them to be very succinct, clear statements. It should cover the entirety of your program, not individual components. So some examples that we've seen that have worked well are an individual gained employment and holds the job for over 2 years, or an individual completes a certain prescribed course or series of courses in your program, and then at the end of that, they're considered successful. Or they may complete a specific set of goals that they determined with you during an initial assessment. So they may have their own individualized case plan that has their individual goals that they'd like to achieve. And once they achieve those, they may be considered then a successful participant, successful exit. Okay. So those are just a few examples, but this is something that we'll be looking at closely with your first QPR, because it really is a foundation of your program in terms of what does it mean for a participant to be successful, and then you would be reporting outcomes for them. Okay. Not seeing any questions so far. I will move on here. The next section I'd like to look at.
Casey?
Yep.
We just had a hand. Lisa?
Yes, Casey, can you repeat in section, was it question number 2, the risk need assessment tool? Can you go back up to that? You had mentioned 2 ones as examples. Can you repeat those? You said them too fast.
Okay, sure. 2 examples are the Ohio Risk Assessment System, which is referred to as the ORAS, ORAS. The other one is LS/CMI, which is level of service / case management inventory. I'm not endorsing any of those. I'm just strictly giving them as examples, and they're the ones that come to the top of my mind, not for any reason. So please don't take it as BSCC says you must use this. It is solely an example. And Compass is another. I just didn't give that because I forget the acronym of that. So just those are examples. There are many out there. You just want to make sure that they're validated, appropriate for your population. And the key here is we're referring to criminogenic risk need. And a lot of those tools will give you a score that then based on that score, you can put people in low, moderate to high risk of recidivating. So that's what we're referring to with this question.
And let me just remind you that it is not a requirement for this project that you use the evidence-based tools. But if you are using them, that's why Casey is highlighting this is the area that you indicate that information, you share that information. So it is not a requirement that you use those tools or that you use the evidence-based risk assessment models, but we do want to know if you are using it, make sure you appropriately report it in that area. Carol?
Hey, yeah, so we're anxiously awaiting a signed contract. And is this going to be on the OneDrive when we do get our signed contract?
Yes.
And-
Your quarterly progress reports will be emailed to you, will be sent out to you, and you'll be accessing them in that area.
So that's once we have our contract, because I
Yes,
haven't seen it
yes,
yet.
yes.
Okay.
Once you have your contract is when you'll actually get the rest of the documents that go along with the project work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And somebody typed in there the name of the Compass for me. Thank you. Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions.
Thank you so much. I have never known what that stood for either.
I cannot imagine why I forget that one.
Thank you, Bernadette.
Thank you all. All right. So moving on then. Sorry, I'm having a hard time reading my notes here. Okay, section C, goals and objectives. In your individualized template, this section where it has goals and objectives will be pre-filled in for you with the goals and objectives that were included in your proposal. So remember, you were awarded funding based on what you said you would do in your proposal. So those goals and objectives are part of your quarterly progress reports. If you talked with Tanya and made adjustments to your goals and objectives, and those are not appropriately transferred to your QPR, please let me know and we'll work through that and update your template. It could be that that got missed in the shuffle here at BSCC. And if that's the case, I apologize, but we can take care of it. But basically your goals and objectives will be here. And we ask you in 1A to report and describe your progress you made during the quarter toward the goal and its objectives. And so a lot of things that we see here is a lack of specificity and information tied directly to those goals and objectives. So we want information on the goals and the objectives. So for example, if your goal says you're going to enroll 100 people annually, and you just talk about, your enrollment process, but you don't tell me how many you've enrolled yet so far this year, I'm probably going to be like, okay, but how many have you enrolled so far? I'm looking for that number that you said you were going to hit in that goal. So being very clear to speak to the goals and its objectives. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Yeah. And so you'll have that description for each goal and its associated objectives. So some of you have 3 goals and associated objectives.
We have one question in the chat, Casey. The question is, will sections 1 and 2 be the same each quarter?
So I'm assuming section 1 is referring to section A, project description. Thank you, A and B.
A and B, yeah.
Yes, they will be the same each quarter. So once you complete section A and BSCC has reviewed it and we are happy with your definition of success, we don't have any questions about your risk assessment and all those things, we can lock those answers into your template so that you don't have to update it every quarter. Okay, and it could be like down the road, I might just pull out section A if that section is fully complete for your project and, based on review, we're all happy with the way that's filled out and completed and the information. So I understand that these things usually don't change across your project once you get them established, but it may become just a pre-filled in part of your template. And then if you need to make changes, let us know. Section B will certainly remain longer because it takes, longer to get to complete or established for some of these implementation phases. Okay. Moving on to section D. Pardon my scrolling here. There is a part in here where we ask you to describe any highlights or accomplishments that occurred during the reporting period for your project. And a lot of times it's very common for grantees to tell us about the accomplishments of individuals in your program, which is really great. And we want to hear those things. Just please don't use their names. We want to protect the privacy of your participants. You can use initials like A period, H period, but just don't use their full names. They have a right to privacy, and anything that you submit to the BSCC can be requested in a Public Records Request Act. So just be aware of the privacy of your participants. I'm going to scroll down here to section F. Section F is solely focused on participants who were enrolled during the reporting period. Okay, so if this is for quarter 1, that would be individuals enrolled last July through September, through the end of September. And you would tell us how many people were referred to your project and how many people were enrolled. So ideally, you should have some type of what I refer to as a funneling mechanism, where people may be referred to your project, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your project is appropriate for them. So the first funneling mechanism is, have they spent time in state prison? And another funneling mechanism may be, are my services appropriate for these individuals and their goals? So this is all project specific. These are all things that you will define for yourself in your project. Of course, besides the state prison thing, because that's a requirement of ARG funds. But ideally, you should have some type of funneling mechanism where the number of people referred to your project is greater than or equal to the number of people enrolled in your project. And generally, it would be greater than, right? Because your project isn't necessarily appropriate for all people that are referred to. So that's one of the first things we look at is this number of referred greater than or equal to number of participants enrolled? Yes, Rocky?
Rocky, yeah. How y'all doing?
Good.
Quick question. The LEP that's due Monday, is that a one-time thing?
Yes, that is a one-time thing. It's your local evaluation plan that outlines how you're going to evaluate your program. And then, so once it's submitted, that's what you're following as you know, throughout the course of your program, so that at the end you can write that local evaluation report. Lisa?
Yes, thank you. Do we need to track where the referral is coming from? And delineate that out?
Yes.
Like a self-referral or from an agency?
Yes, you will track that for enrolled participants.
Okay, sponsor enroll, but just the referral ones, do we need to track those as well?
Not for all referred, just for those enrolled. So
Okay.
if I scroll down, section F.2 is solely for enrolled participants. And we ask for the point of entry. So parole, probation, court, things like that. And this column, if I sum down this column, the value here on the total should match the value here on people who were enrolled for the first time. So let's say 20 people were referred to your program, but only 17 were enrolled. This first table in F.2, you would report the point of entry for those 17 individuals, and the remaining demographics in here would only be reported for those 17 individuals because they were enrolled. And when you sum down these columns for the respective tables, it should equal 17, the number of people enrolled. Okay, so that's just a quick data check. And that's the first thing we're going to do when we review the data for these sections, is we're going to sum down these columns and make sure that you're providing the demographics for every single individual that was enrolled. Okay, excellent question. Thank you. All right, moving on to section G. So section G is about the number of actively engaged participants in your project, regardless of the quarter that they enrolled in. So for example, if you had 10 people enroll in quarter 1 and 10 people enroll in quarter 2, and nobody successfully completed the program yet, you could have up to 20 participants, right? 10 plus 10 actively engaged in your program during the period. And we define actively engaged as any individual who received at least one service during the reporting period. And again, regardless of when they enrolled in the program. Okay, so if you're providing data for quarter 3 and you haven't had anyone exit your program, this count could equal the total number of people that enrolled in quarter 1, 2, and 3. And so that is the first thing that we would double check as well. Is this a count that seems appropriate given the number of people that enrolled in your program across all quarters and the number of people who have exited? Does this count seem appropriate, right? So it shouldn't be greater than total number of people enrolled across all reporting periods and total number of people exited across all reporting periods. And hopefully that makes sense. And then for any individual who was active during the reporting period, you're going to report to us the services that they received. An individual can be recorded in multiple rows, but again, a single cell here should not exceed your total number of engaged participants you reported in the table above. So if you have 30 actively engaged participants, 30 people may have received life skills training. I don't know how you could have had 40 people receive life skills training if you only had 30 engaged. Okay, so that's just a quick check that we do to make sure that the figures are making sense. Okay. Regarding services here that you're reporting, we do want to make sure that you have a mechanism to ensure that the individuals participated in them. So just because you referred somebody out to say one of these types of services, there needs to be follow-up to make sure that that individual did indeed follow up with that referral and receive that service for you to report them here. So if you're doing direct services, your agency provides them directly. That's probably, you know, pretty easy to verify through like a sign-in sheet or your case management system types of logs that you have. But if you're strictly operating on a referral basis, you need to have some type of relationship with that referral agency to find out, did that person actually follow through and receive the service in order to report it here. So here we're asking, did they actually receive these services, not were they referred? Okay. Right. Moving on to section H. This is where we ask you during the reporting period, so if it's Q1 during July through September, how many people exited your project? And this could have been exited for any reason, and you would report that total number here, generally in the first time entry. And then we ask you to report the reason for the exit. So it could be successful completion, still active and inactive, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. Or they dropped out, they were non-compliant, asked to leave, they were arrested or incarcerated, you determined that your services weren't appropriate for them, or some other unknown. If you do use this unknown, if you could like add a comment here and tell us what that unknown is, because I feel like I've covered all the bases here. So I would be curious to know what wasn't covered. But talking about successful completion, this refers back to that definition that we asked you for in section 2, which was, what does it mean for an individual to successfully complete your program? And that's that very succinct definition that is measurable of a person's completion of your program. So based on that definition, you'll tell us how many people completed and are still active or will be inactive.
Casey?
Yep.
We had a question pop in a couple seconds ago around death. What about death? I think as a
Unknown.
as unknown, that's how you would.
Yeah, hopefully that doesn't happen very frequently. I've only ran into that one time. That may be something that I need to add, but for right now, put them in unknown, and maybe in the notes section, put that one unknown was a death. So yeah, that would be the one basis I probably did not cover there. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. Robert?
Yeah, can you just touch a little bit more on, what would it mean to be still active?
Yeah. So the distinction between still active and inactive is sometimes you all have some mentoring that still goes on, or these weekly check-ins or group sessions, things that I refer to as light touch services that an individual may still want to come and participate in, even though they're not actively working on an individual case plan anymore. So let's say your definition of success is they completed all the goals and objectives in their individual case plan, which may have been housing, employment, financial stability, a variety of things. And let's say they complete all those, but they still want to be able to check in with you all once a week or do some type of group services that are happening. That's what I would call successful completion, still active, the more light touch services. If you don't anticipate they'll come back to you for those things, I would just classify them as inactive. We understand that you all want to be here for these individuals at any time that they need help and recognize that. So that's why we still kind of have this, they're still active, but successful and successful but inactive for those people that just, thank you very much, I'm doing great, and move on their way.
Yeah, because for example, my experience with cohort 1, let's say that individuals completed their goals, services, and they had job placement, but because of they're still learning how to sustain themselves and money management, those type of things. They still kind of need some supportive services along the way. So that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, so if you're providing those supportive services in kind of what I would refer to as a light touch manner, I would go ahead and record them as successful, still active. But if those things that you mentioned were part of their case plan, I would hold off until they feel confident in those things to report them as a successful completion, still active. Because we want to capture as many positive outcomes for these individuals as possible. And if they're still working on some goals or objectives they have, just hold off on, successfully completing them until you can report every great thing that they've done. And that'll come in the next section.
Thank you.
Really, that kind of goes along with your definition of success and re-enrollments, right? So somebody might complete your program and you think they're done, and then they come back and say, oh, but now I want to work on XYZ. You would re-enroll them because they now have a new case plan or new objectives. Generally, I would say you want re-enrollments to be rare and not the norm. So look at your definition of success and make sure that you're, looking at the whole person and incorporating that in your definition of success. It's going to make your data collection a lot easier rather than having all of these re-enrollments that you have to track as second-time enrollments. And the reason why we have this first-time, second-time enrollments is if I just tracked enrollments, that wouldn't be an individual count of unique people. So that's why we track them as a second enrollment, because I want to be able to tell the legislature the unique number of people served by ARG programs. So hopefully that kind of helps explain first and second time enrollments.
Thank you.
Diane?
Hi, thank you. I think you answered it. I was thinking along the lines that, let's say a court recognized or court mandated class they have to take, and it's going to take a while. So would that be a successful completion when they're attending? They no longer need that extensive case management. They achieved a job, but they're still attending a 52-week program that's mandated. Would you count that as a successful completion inactive?
I think that's up to you guys and how you want to set up your program.
Okay.
I would have to know more about your program to really give you guidance there.
Okay.
But that definition of success is really driven by each of you and what's appropriate for your program and individuals that you're serving.
Okay, thank you.
And Diane, I would add into that, that if part of their case plan was to take the class, the 52-week class, then their case plan probably isn't complete until that class is complete, even though they finished all of the other parts. Because it's a 52-week class, then they just won't finish their case plan until that 52-week class is over. I would want you to be really careful with that, because if something happens and they fall out of that class, let's say at week 27, but you've successfully completed them, well, they really haven't completed because that 52-week class was involved in that case plan. So I would want to make sure that you're looking at that as well when you're making those choices.
Thank you.
I thought of that. Otherwise, you end up with a re-enrollment, right?
I thought of that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Caroline?
Hi. So when we are serving, our definitions of success is around completion of coursework. So it's tidy in that way. But we also have people who move out of the area or, out of our contact area. So for those clients, previously we had, they were like they moved. But now, I'm not sure if we would put them under services not appropriate for the participant, or how to capture those people who are just have moved.
My suggestion would be services not appropriate because they're no longer in your service area.
Okay, and then the same with, we have folks who are strongly encouraged to participate with their parole agent. And sometimes the parole agent will say, hey, this guy's working, he doesn't need to go anymore, and they'll drop out. Are we saying that those are dropouts? Like we have previously said, like there's an early authorized exit that's kind of not counted against the program participation as much as they had authorization from their agent to no longer participate. How do you want us to capture those individuals?
Oh,
I would say dropped out or lost contact, especially if the parole agent is saying that they don't need to come anymore. I would probably consider them a dropout because they didn't complete. But that's just kind of the way it's processing in my head. I think, programmatically, you'll want to look at what makes the most sense in that capacity. Like, how does it impact your overall program? And would they be coming back, or, kind of how would all of that work?
Right, okay. And then, in the notes section here, do you want us to put a bunch of notes to explain all this stuff? Or, because that might be something that we have, like, oh, we have 15 dropped out, but 5 of those were early authorized. So we could note that or not. It's up to the amount of information that you guys want. We're certainly tracking it.
it doesn't hurt to note it. I can totally understand you tracking that for your own program information and potentially your own local evaluation, because that could be something that would be lessons learned or things for you to address in your program, right? So it may be more pertinent to your own project evaluation than ours, but certainly helpful to note it.
Great, thanks.
I have a question in the chat. If someone moves out of the service area, moves to another parole office for supervision, does that disqualify them from services? Or may we continue to serve them as long as they were eligible at the outset of services? And the answer to that question is, as long as they are in your approved service area based on your application, then you can continue serving them. So if you have a client who is in LA and your contract says you serve LA County, but your participant or your client moves to San Bernardino, you can no longer provide services to that participant because they are out of your approved service area. So you can only serve those clients who are in your approved service area per your contract or your application. There was one more in the chat. Are we able to employ through CalVIP grant but provide services through ARG? That would be a question where I would want to have offline, where we can have more context about what your ARG grant is and what your CalVIP grant is. So I would not want to get into that discussion in this forum. So please do reach out to me. I'm not sure who you are. It looks like an acronym of sorts, GODSP. If you would reach out to me directly, we can schedule some time and have that conversation. You do want to make sure that you are not supplanting or anything like that. So we would want to look at that a little bit more closely before you dive into doing that particular thing. Ventura County.
Hi. So I have a question about like discharging parole. So when I have a client who discharges parole, they've completed the program because they've discharged parole, and I would discharge them out of our database as well. However, they still want to complete, like if it's the batterers intervention program, would I put a successful completion still active or inactive? Or would I'm not sure where I would put them.
Before you answer that one, Casey, that's very similar to another question that just popped up in the chat, which is, can there be more than one way to successfully complete? For example, completion of case plan and or gain full-time employment. So do you want to tackle both of those together, or?
So yeah, I think it's, again, your definition of success is solely driven by you. We're just reviewing it to make sure that it makes sense and it's measurable. So you could define success as they completed parole, or you can define it as they completed parole and completed all programs they were enrolled in. So that's up to you. That's your decision. We're not here to, so tell you what your definition of success should be. You tell us, and if it seems like it's appropriate and measurable and makes sense and succinct, like people could understand it, then we're going to be okay with that.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Kelly. You're on mute.
I just want to clarify. So if we create a definition that for completion, that is either this or this, as long as that's measurable, is that okay to have more than one option as a definition?
Yeah, I'm going to say yes, most likely.
Okay.
It's going to depend on what I understand of your project. And my question to you, is it always or could it be and?
It could be and.
Yeah, so just think about it as you're defining it, and if it makes sense for your project and what we understand of it, we're going to be okay with it.
Thank you.
Just keep in mind as you're doing that, remember what Casey was talking about the re-enrollment component of it. You want that to be a rarity. So you don't want to say, oh, they completed the case plan or gained employment. But if they gain employment, but they're still working on their case plan, right? So now are you re-enrolling them because you're still providing services? So how are you doing that? So you definitely want to consider like what's going to be the overall impact to your program and to your data collection piece. So when you're looking at multiple ways to complete or to successfully complete your program, do consider that as well.
All excellent questions, guys. Thank you.
Yes, really good. Thank you.
So I'm going to move on to section H.3, which is asking about the demographic information of only those who successfully completed. And this could be successfully completed, still active or inactive, it doesn't matter. But only for those who were successful, we're asking for you to provide us their demographic information again. And this is their demographic information that you gathered at the point of entry. So you don't have to like collect it again, right? So they may have turned from 34 to 35, just report that 34. So that just simplifies your data collection. It also allows us to see the demographics of those who were successful, right? So we can tie it back to the at entry. And then finally, moving on to section H.4, again, only for successful completions, we're asking you to report their outcomes. And we have a variety of outcomes listed here. You are not required to track all of these. You need to track those that are pertinent to your program, and especially those that we see in your proposal that you said you would measure and track. Okay. The other thing is we want you to have a measure or a tool for assessing these, both pre and post. So at the time of enrollment and at the time of completion, you should have a tool to measure these, or some way that you're defining how you're confirming that the individual did achieve that outcome. So for example, employment, you may just get a copy of their pay stub, or you may reach out to their employer and confirm employment, say over the phone or in some other way, right? So you just need to make sure that you have some type of tool or tracking mechanism pre and post to make sure that these things were indeed achieved. Okay. And sorry, and the list continues. On outcomes, again, you don't have to track every single one, those that are pertinent to your project, and especially those that were in your proposal. And then finally, we have a section for you to tell us anything else that's necessary to explain maybe some of the data you reported or any other pertinent information about your program. Okay, so that's a really quick overview of some of the pertinent key areas of the QPR. We're always available for questions. Just email that ARG cohort 3 inbox, and Natalia will route those to me. If she's not able to answer them, she'll route them to me, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. One final note on submission of QPRs. We have created, whoops, sorry guys. We have created, can you guys still see my screen, or do I need to? What are you seeing?
We're seeing the progress report.
Okay, let me stop and do a reshare.
Okay. While you're doing that, Cameron asked if you will send the progress report independently. What's going to happen, Cameron, is once your progress report has been updated, yes, it will go to you, and all of those pieces that Casey said would be locked, all that information will be in there, and then you'll just start reporting your progress reports.
For progress report submission, we have an online form for you to submit your quarterly progress reports. This here is what it looks like. And it's really simple. It just has drop downs for you to select who you are, which grantee it is that's submitting this. You enter your full name and email address, which quarter you're submitting the QPR for, and then whether that submission is an initial submission or a resubmission. So if we had questions for you and you were addressing those questions in your QPR, it would be a resubmission. And then there's a place for you to attach your QPR. If you'd like a copy of your responses, you just select this and then your email address and hit submit, and you'll have a copy of it as well. And that will be submitted to us electronically, and we will be notified of the submission right away. So it doesn't require you to email us to tell us that it's been submitted or anything like that. And I will paste this link into the chat for you all to have. And I believe Natalia is going to put it in your OneDrive folders too. There will be like a QPR submission. There'll just be a little Word document or something that has that link in it. So that concludes my presentation, other than to say that I do have open office hours this week for those of you who are working on your local evaluation plan. I believe the remaining hours are tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. and Thursday at 10 a.m. And those are just non-formal times for you to pop in and ask any questions you may have about your local evaluation plan as you're working on that.
A question came in about submission. Can you submit to multiple addresses by using a comma? PT, I'm not sure I'm following that question. I'm guessing it's in the smart sheet, but what do you mean submit to multiple addresses? You mean
when you want to, yeah, Tanya, thank you. What I was asking is down on that form, can we add, like if we wanted to add our executive or the project manager or whatever to receive a copy of that same submission at the same time, can you put in their email address, comma, a next email address, comma, and so forth, and then hit submit? Would it submit to all of them?
So you mean in terms of being able to get a copy of your responses?
Correct.
Okay, Casey, will it do that?
I'm checking it right now. I do not know, so I
found, oh, hey, this is Faith, if you can hear me. I found you cannot do that. Okay. So what I did was I emailed it just to myself and then forwarded it to the team.
Yes, Faith is correct. It did not do it. It says it's an invalid email format. So thank you, Faith.
Thank you, Faith. Can we edit things before submitting, or is it a one-time submission? Eva, I'm not sure I'm understanding your request. So once you have completed your QPR and you've entered all your data, you will edit it at that point, right? When you're documenting all of the data that you're going to submit. When you go to the Smartsheet to do your submission, then you will submit it as a one-time submission. Casey will review it. Casey and Natalia, they look at it, and if they have questions, what have you, they will send it back to you. If you need to resubmit, then you'll make your edits, and then you'll use that same process to resubmit those changes. Was that the question you were asking, or is there something different that we missed?
I answered my own question. I hadn't realized that we were attaching a Word document. So when I looked at it a little closer after submitting it, I understood. Thank you.
Not a problem, not a problem. Faith, the QPR is due May 15th, and we'll go cover that at the very end. The office hours information, Natalia will include that in the wrap up that she sends out this afternoon. I'll have Natalia include those office hour information when she sends out our wrap up for today. Awesome, thanks. Okay, cool. Thank you, Casey.
Yep, I do have to run to another engagement, but thank
Yes.
you all for the great questions. And if there are any more, I'm sure Natalia will forward them and we'll get a response to you all somehow. So thank you so much and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Casey. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, so we will keep this party rolling, and I'm going to turn it right over now to Danielle Feist, and she's going to talk to you guys about indirect costs.
Hi, everybody. Can we see my screen? Tanya, do you see it?
Yep.
Perfect.
Good.
So I'll go over briefly about the indirect cost rate and what documentation you will need for the ARG grant. And this is just for cohort 3. There is a difference between cohort 3, 2, and 1 for what those indirect cost rates are. So please do keep in mind that things slightly changed for cohort 3. So this is only for your cohort 3 grant if you do have previous grants with ARG. I'll first cover a brief overview of the budget, what the different rates are, the documentation that you will need to include while you are claiming indirect cost rates, the responsibilities of the grantee, which are you guys, and then also just give a brief summary of what we went over. So for the indirect cost rates, when you were submitting your request for proposal, each organization was asked to submit to the board a project budget. And this project budget included a narrative of all the budgeted costs, all the different line items of all the expenses that your program would need to incur in order to be successful. One of these sections, it would be, if you remember, if not, I'll kind of show a little snippet of the budget itself. One of these sections at the very bottom was regarding our indirect cost rate. And this rate will be documented in your grant agreement. I know some of you have gotten fully executed grant agreements. Some we're still working through. Once you do get a finalized grant agreement, we are also sending out OneDrive access. So you'll be able to have your workbook and you'll be able to see the budget in that workbook as well. And just so we all are aware, I will be sharing these slides. Natalia will be emailing that out to everybody. So you will be able to reference this when you are doing your first invoice. So there were 2 types of allowable rates for the ARG, both for rental assistance and WHO, the warm handoff cohort 3. The first rate is the de minimis. This rate is applicable if your organization does not have a federally approved negotiated indirect cost rate. It was capped at 10% of the total grant award. The federally negotiated indirect cost rate, this is only for if your organization does have a federally approved rate. this rate is capped at 20% of the total grant award, regardless if your rate is for an amount that is over this. So if you do have a negotiated rate that is 25% of the total grant award, you will only be capped at being able to spend that 20%. So which indirect cost rate do you use? You have to utilize whichever rate was budgeted for in your project budget narrative. So this was a rating factor when you did submit your request for proposal to the board. When these were ranked by our executive steering committee, one of the sections that was scored was the budget and how well it mirrored and reflected what was written in your narrative portion. So we do have to adhere to the budget that was proposed and submitted to the board. So in this budget, you would have chosen, if you do have a federally approved negotiated rate, or you would have chosen the de minimis. If your organization is going to be utilizing the federally approved negotiated rate, your organization needs to make sure that you submit valid documentation of this rate and all of its parameters to the board. It is the responsibility of your organization, so all of the grantees, it's their responsibility to make sure that the board is up to date with any changes made to this rate. If the rate ends up expiring, or there are any various changes, you do need to make sure that you email Natalia as well as the ARG inbox those updated rates, so we could keep those on file to be able to approve your invoicing. The rate, again, as stated previously, cannot exceed 20% of the total grant award. And if your rate is less than 10% of the total grant award, you still have to adhere to your negotiated rate. We can't then switch to de minimis because de minimis allows up to 10%. You have to go with whatever rate that was negotiated if you do have a negotiated rate. So we do have the BSCC grant guide, and the grant guide does have some verbiage regarding the negotiated indirect cost rate. And it just says that evidence should include information on the basis used to determine indirect costs and the treatment of fringe benefits, paid absences. The main part that I wanted to hit on was the last sentence. So for the multi-year grant, a negotiated indirect cost rate is required for each year or performance period of the grant. So if it does expire in the middle of the grant, it does not mean that that rate gets to then carry on through the rest of the grant, because it was the rate that you established when you did submit your proposal. So that's why it's very important to keep us up to date with what rate may change, and we need to have that on file. And then I do have a little snippet at the bottom of this section. This is taken directly out of the project budgets. So it shows the two different costs that you could have the two different rates that you could have chosen for indirect costs. So the first rate, again, is the de minimis, which would not exceed 10% of the total grant award. And that's only if you do not have a federally approved rate. And then the indirect costs of up to 20% of the total grant award if you do have a federally approved negotiated rate. So required documentation for indirect costs. So remember, when you are submitting to the BSCC, there's there's two different processes for submitting invoices, because we do have, or submitting costs. We have invoices and we have what we call desk reviews. If there is a desk review required for a specific invoice, this is you sending us a packet of supporting documentation. We've covered all of this in orientation, so if you need a refresher, you could go back and look at those recordings of what those desk review packets look like. But as far as what we will need for indirect costs regarding invoicing and desk reviews is, again, always make sure that you have on file with BSCC your current federally approved indirect cost rate, that you must claim indirect cost rates according to whichever rate that was listed on your project budget, that you will also be able to find in your grant agreement, because your grant agreement is also your contract that you might hear us refer to it as. You will be able to see a copy of your proposal, which includes the project budget in there in your grant agreement. When you do request reimbursement for indirect costs on an invoice, it is important to remember that the indirect cost rate is applied to the amount that was actually expended and requested for reimbursement. It is not something that you invoice us according to what was budgeted. Again, so it needs to be reflective of what was actually incurred for expenses in that quarter. And then all costs for those claiming de minimis must be supported with accounting records. So we'll need to be able to see invoices, purchase orders, canceled checks, any other records to support payments that show actual expenditures. Come CMV, when Tanya comes in and looks, does the comprehensive monitoring visit, we're going to have to see what was determined to be indirect costs that you did claim up to 10% of the grant award for. So documentation for your indirect costs to submit during a desk review. When you claim indirect costs on an invoice, you must provide the calculation for how you came to this amount. You should be able to list out the costs associated with the total with applicable breakdowns. And when providing documentation for your desk review, you must submit to BSCC a single page document that will be attached to your desk review packet. Since it is the last section of any of the budgets or the invoice, it will be in the last section of your desk review packet. And it will give us a calculation for the amount that you're claiming, and you'll just state which rate you're claiming and the calculation of how you came to that total amount that is also on your invoice. These should be the same exact amounts that you're showing on both. When you're using the de minimis rate on this page, you will also need to list out all the indirect costs that are being claimed with a short description and breakdown of costs for each expenditure. You can't just simply send to us a statement saying and reiterating that, oh, we're using the de minimis, it's 10%. We will want to see what costs that you came to that 10% for. So the invoice must list out actual expenditures for this category. Think overhead costs, utilities, admin staff, things that are indirect costs will need to be listed out for us. We calculated out this much of overhead, this much of utilities, this much for admin is the responsibility of ARG. It is within the 10% of our cap for de minimis, and this is what we're claiming. And it'll be on that one single page in your desk review packet. And remember, the invoice and desk reviews should both be standalone documents. We shouldn't have to go to the invoice and see a comment saying, oh, go look at the desk review for information of the breakdown of these expenditures. We need to see each expenditure labeled out with the calculation, and it will go and you'll need to total it for us. Again, we went over all the invoicing and desk review process because it is a very lengthy, there's a lot of different aspects to it, a lot of different questions that can come up with invoicing and desk reviews. So if you do need a refresher during orientation and the virtual binder that we sent out, it has all of the recordings from when we went over how to do an invoice and how to submit a desk review. So keep in mind what will be your responsibility when it comes to any indirect costs. You'll need to keep on file your negotiated indirect costs rate with us. Make sure you also keep it in-house in case Tanya does come for a comprehensive monitoring visit. It should be easily accessible to anybody with the BSCC, and it should be accessible to anyone with your fiscal team to make sure that they're aware of what the current rate is so they know how to invoice properly. Keep the BSCC up to date on any changes that are made to your negotiated indirect cost rate. Anything that changes on there, we need to be aware of it. Otherwise, we cannot move forward with your invoices, or we might be approving invoices based on information that is no longer valid. And then we will need to, once we find out the differences, then we have to go back and try to find ways to fix it if we can. That's not the best way to always work with the BSCC. I know a lot of us, I'm very guilty of asking for forgiveness, not for permission, but that doesn't always work when it goes with numbers and invoices. So make sure that you are always keeping us up to date with any changes to your negotiated indirect cost rate. Make sure you're also maintaining files of indirect costs when it is time for a comprehensive monitoring visit. You know, make sure if you are claiming the de minimis that we do have those invoices for any overhead costs or any of those indirect costs that you are using an allocation for to submit to us on your invoice. And then when submitting an invoice or desk review, always make sure to give us applicable breakdowns and descriptions of the costs that are being claimed on your invoice. It should be a document that, you know, anybody can go up to and be like, okay, they purchased this, how many of them for this amount? Oh, yep, it's in their budget. It all makes sense. We can, you know, move on from there, but your analyst shouldn't have to go and try to assume, oh, this cost is for this position, this cost is for this item in this desk review packet. We need to be able to make sure they're true standalone documents. And be sure to communicate. If you're having any issues with invoicing, you know, feel free to reach out to your analyst if you do have any questions. Make sure that if your analyst reaches out to you for any revisions that are needed, that we do get those in as soon as possible. We are moving to a reimbursement model for ARG cohort 3. It is no longer an advanced payment model. So you will be waiting until approval of an invoice, not from when you submit it, but when it is approved and all costs are accounted for, that's when we will start sending out payments for reimbursement. So it is very important, if there are any revisions needed to be made to an invoice or a desk review, that you do that you are responsive and communicate with your BSCC team. And just a quick summary again, we've gone over these a few times within the presentation, but there are two types of indirect cost rates for ARG. We have the de minimis, and then we have our federally negotiated indirect cost rate. You must always follow your rate that is in your grant agreement, and that can be found in your invoice workbook. Make sure you're keeping all documentation for indirect cost expenditures on file for a comprehensive monitoring visit. When submitting invoices and desk reviews, be sure to provide the board with breakdown of calculations of how you got to the total you're claiming. Always make sure that we have your most up-to-date negotiated indirect cost rate on file. And this is your responsibility. We will not be aware of any changes that are made to this rate. So until you let us know, we won't know. And just a reminder, always review your grant administration guide, always review your project budget when you are submitting invoices and desk reviews. Those are the two easiest ways to make sure that what you're claiming are allowable expenses per the grant guide and per your budget. Everybody in your organization that handles invoicing or purchasing or anything regarding this project should be aware and have read the grant administration guide. And that's about it. We can start taking questions. Let me just stop sharing really fast.
Okay. Go ahead, Melissa, and I'll read the questions in the chat for you, Danny.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. So as far as keeping keeping the files documenting indirect cost expenditures on site for the comprehensive site visit, would that, okay, so like, for example, if it, you know, it's utilities, a percentage of utilities, a percentage of maybe bookkeeping, et cetera, how do you want us to show that as far as for the comprehensive? I mean, you want copies of the utility bills, copies of, you know, payroll for bookkeeper, or how do we do that?
When we come out, we'll ask for it. So as long as you have those bills available, right? Because we'll want to see, what did you charge? What did you bill us for? And then we will want to see the verification of those expenses, right? And so if you told us it was utilities and bookkeeping and so on and so forth, then we'll say, okay, show me that quarter's worth of expenses. And then you'll pull those bills out and we'll look at it. We'll ask whatever, you know, any other follow-up questions. And that's pretty much how that'll go. So you should have access to whatever those expenses were. You should have the fact that they were accrued expenses and paid expenses.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. The first question in the chat is, do we have an estimated timeline for invoice approval?
So we don't have a broad estimated timeline for invoice approval because it can really vary. Like I was saying, if there are any needed revisions, those can take a few different, I've seen revisions go back quite a few times, or I've seen invoices come in the day it's due, it's completely 100% correct, and those get approved within a week. So it's really up to the grantees, and that's why we stress, make sure you understand your grant guide, make sure you understand what your budget is, because if something's not budgeted for, you can't expend for it until you do a budget modification. So just make sure that you're always on top of it, you're ahead of it. If you do have an idea that you are going to be without a budget, incurring expenses that are not in your budget, or there's a salary increase, those will not be approved until you do have some form of a budget modification, perhaps a meeting with your field representative, that modification has been approved. Not all modifications or changes to budgets are just automatically approved. So just making sure you're staying on top of it is a great way to make sure that you'll get those payments as soon as possible, as well as, just because something's a due date doesn't mean you have to wait till the due date. Our due dates are way out past from the reporting period. So if the reporting period's ended, you can send us the next day an invoice and tell us it's ready for review, and we'll be able to review that. And if it's done correctly, we could get payment out. Generally, we approve it on our end. Our accounting has about 2 weeks to approve it, and then it goes through SCO, which is another 2 weeks. So by the time we approve it until you receive payment, we like to say about 30 to 45 days for you to reach that check. So just to keep that in mind.
And I just want to emphasize that how fast we turn them around is 100% based on how cleanly they come in. So everything Danny just said, committed to memory and just follow it, because if you get us good invoices, we turn them around swiftly. It's the ones that we've got to do the work on that creates the delays in getting things approved. The next question was, what was the turnaround, which we've already talked about. Is there an approved list of indirect costs? I don't know that anything like that exists. Danny, are you familiar with anything like that?
No, to try to get a comprehensive list, there's always going to be something thrown at us, right? So anything that cannot be directly allocated to the grant, something that's a shared indirect cost, is something that you can invoice us for, or potentially invoice us for as an indirect cost.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. If we do have a federal negotiated indirect cost rate, what are the supporting documentation requirements for claiming the negotiated rate?
So basically, you'll still that one page, of expenditures where you're going to break out, say what rate you chose and the calculation for how much that you're claiming for that invoice for that quarter. We still need in a desk review packet. As far as supporting documentation that you will need for it, since you had to have shown all of these costs, these overhead costs, these shared costs, these indirect costs to be able to get this negotiated rate, you do not need to send us that supporting documentation in your desk review packet. We will, though, like I said, we do need to make sure we have your most current rate and what the parameters of that rate are on file. So whatever documentation you get back, once you have that negotiated rate, you need to make sure we have that on file, and that will be your supporting documentation.
Thank you, Danny. The next question, we started some of our staff on a 1099 due to cash flow issues. Do we put these costs in salaries or in consultant category on the invoice?
So there's two parts to that, right? If you originally had them in salaries and benefits because they were W-2 employees that were either salary or hourly based, you will first remember, if it's not on the budget, you need to have a budget modification. So you'll first need to come and talk to us about what those changes look like, changing them to a 1099. So first we would need to work through a budget mod, and you would need to move those into professional services since they are contracted employees. So yes, you are correct that you would not be putting them in salaries and benefits. However, it's a little bit more complicated because we do need to have accounted for those changes, as well as if there are any changes to how much you are are paying them. And then if you need to also see, because if there are cash flow issues, then you might not need to have whatever you originally budgeted for that position. You may have a difference, right? That we need to now reallocate that money somewhere else to services and supplies to provide more direct services. We can't just move the money in the invoicing section. It has to be moved via budget money.
And then there are some other concerns that you'll want to make sure that you are clear with on your end around Department of Labor, and to ensure that you can go between. So there are some stipulations between 1099 and W-2 folks that, again, we are not versed in, so we cannot provide guidance on that. But you really do want to make sure, if you're doing that, you just want to make sure that you have covered all of the bases so that you don't find yourselves in any trouble with the IRS or the FTB or whomever down the line, or, you know, Department of Labor, those things. So you will want to make sure that those parts are addressed. And when you do your budget mod to us, you will want to clarify that for us as well. Melissa.
Thank you. I just thought of another question. So when you mentioned earlier about the narrative part of the indirect costs, and referring to our project and budget, I don't recall submitting a narrative for indirect costs. It was just, we have our percentage listed in the budget. So I'm curious, do you mean by narrative like what we put when we do the quarterly invoice, or the monthly invoicing? Is that where it goes?
Yeah.
If you did not, I'm sorry, hold on, Danny. If you did not include it in your project budget narrative, then yes, you do need to explain what those costs are on your invoice documentation. Were you going to add something, Danny? I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that. And if we do, for whatever reason, need to kind of clarify what those indirect cost rates are, or what the narrative portion, because there was a section under indirect costs. If it wasn't filled out, like Tanya said, we can still find ways. But if there is any change that needs to be made for it, and we do need to do something, we would do a line item change if we need to expand on what that narrative is. So that's how we would go around that.
And as we move through this process, Danny, let's have some discussion offline. For those of you who do not have narrative in your project budget around the indirect cost category, we may be asking you to give us a line item change to include that narrative. So that's just something to be prepared for. I'm not saying for sure we'll do it. Danny and I will have some conversation and see what makes the most sense. But just know that if you do not have the narrative, you will need some, you will absolutely be wanting to put the definitions or the specific expenditures in your description on your invoice. And then you'll include that on that one page that you submit for your supporting documentation packet. How do we obtain an approved NICR? I do not know all of the steps that you need to take for that, but I do know that you need to have a cognizant agency and all this stuff. There's lots of hoops to jump through. I am not versed in that process, so unfortunately, I do not have any guidance for you on that particular avenue, how to get down that avenue. I would say if there's anyone in the room that has any information they can share on how to apply for the NICR, please throw that in the chat. Help your colleagues know if they want to go down that road, what they can do, but because we do not have the details on how to do that. Can we get some type of approval on indirect supporting documents for one of the first invoices so we know we are on the right track?
So you will be submitting a desk review with your first invoice. So when you do submit those documents, invoices, you don't just submit them. We have to go through an approval process. So you will, the first invoice, be told if that supporting documentation, and this is for if it's de minimis, right? Like if you have your negotiated indirect costs, right, you don't need to submit, the invoices and such. But once you do submit to us, for the de minimis rate for your first invoice, you will be told, okay, these are not allowable costs or these are allowable costs. So you will know your first invoice.
Yeah, you'll get some feedback for sure. Awesome. Thanks, Danny. Any other questions around the indirect cost rate? How to track it or document it on your invoice? Perfect. Hearing none, we'll keep this party rolling. I wanted to share with you about multiple projects having the enrolling the same participant. Hold on a second. Okay. And so just a quick note on that, I got a couple of emails over the last, I don't know, 2 months or so. A couple of projects were inquiring if we are referring participants to other ARG projects for other services. How do we do that? How do we track that? So yes, if you are collaborating with other ARG grantees for services for your participants, you want to have a very clear a very clear referral policy in place that outlines, this is how we make referrals. This is how we track referrals. You should probably have an internal form that you're using that says this person was referred to this ARG grantee for these services. The other important piece for you to know on this is how are you going to be reporting those outcomes and that data on your quarterly progress report. So if you are the primary grantee that is doing the referring, if you are referring your participant to another project, so I see two that I know offhand. I know Community Works West, I see you, Rocky, and I know Project Heart, I see you, Carol. So I'm going to use you two for an example here, okay? So Rocky, if you are the primary grantee and you have a participant that you want to refer to Project Heart because Project Heart offers a service that you do not, and you are sending your participant there for support, you are the primary referring grantee. So you will be tracking that person as a first-time enrollment, as a primary enrollment. You will be tracking all of their progress. Project Heart, you do not enroll that participant as your ARG client because they are not your ARG client. They are the ARG client for Community Works West. You are providing services. You are providing services under ARG, so you can track them as services provided in your quarterly progress report. They will be tracked as a second-time enrollment for you, not a first-time enrollment, not a project enrollment. You will note them as a second-time enrollment. And you can add a note in the bottom that this person was referred from XYZ for these particular services, and those are the only things that you report their outcomes for. Do not report on all of their outcome services or anything of that nature. You are more than welcome, Project Heart, to do your full assessment. You do your assessment, you collect all of their data, all the information that you need that you would normally do. Just know that the only services you report out on for them, the only outcomes, will be the ones that they were referred to you for. Okay, does that make sense? So that's how, if you are like cross-referencing clients with other ARG participants, that's one of the ways you'll want to make sure that you're tracking and documenting those. Go ahead, Tammy.
This is Home Free. We reach inside the institution with our re-entry coaching. So will we do the same thing for our tracking? What I'm saying is, like, if someone doesn't qualify for Home Free, we send out maybe for them to send them an address or contact another program for them to see if they fit that program. So will we do the same thing with the tracking?
If you aren't enrolling them in Home Free, then they are not being enrolled in your program. So you are not tracking them as participants of your program. So that would be different. So these are for, what I'm speaking about specifically are for those projects or for those participants, I'm sorry, that you are serving, but there is an element of service that they need that you do not provide. So for example, if your niche is programming, right, substance abuse programming, or even employment programming, but the other project focuses on education, and you want your participant to get the education piece from this other project, then you would refer them to that project for education services alone. Okay, so that's a little bit different than I'm doing InReach, I'm screening these folks, they're not eligible for my project, so I'm going to refer them to someone else. Once you do that, then they become the enrollee of that project that you refer them to, right? And you wouldn't be tracking them as an enrollee for your project because they haven't enrolled. You screened them, they didn't meet criteria, so you referred them to somebody that could serve them.
Okay.
That's the difference that you want to make sure you're clear on.
Okay, thank you, Tanya.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Tanya. That was a clarification that I didn't realize I needed. But thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for playing along and letting me use you as an example. Let's see, I'm seeing if there were some questions in the chat that we had missed. Do we need to submit invoices if we do not have a signed contract? You cannot submit an invoice if you do not have a signed contract because you need a signed contract to bill us. So no, once you have your signed contract, then you'll get access to your invoice workbook, and then you will submit invoices for whatever time has passed. Casey's email to schedule. Jaime, Natalia put the information for the office hours for Casey. They're in the chat somewhere, so you can scroll up. And then she's also going to send that information out in the wrap up, so you will get that. If we receive a referral from another ARG funded organization to provide our services, such as our entrepreneurial skills course, should we not include them in our overall participant count? No, you should not include them in your overall participant count because they are being served by that other ARG project. They are only coming to you for that specific component. You can do your battery of assessments and understand the wholeness of that person's needs, but in terms of your tracking for ARG, you will count them as that second time enrollment, and you will clarify that they were referred from another ARG organization for this service alone, and that is the service that you will report out on for your ARG outcomes. Indirect cost. I will share what I think, but I know that
Tanya, this was referring to how to apply or like the stuff that would be needed. So thank you for dropping that in the chat. So there is some more information regarding how you would need to go about or what you would need to have to apply for that federally negotiated indirect cost.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Danny. I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. Okay. Can we have an extension if we are still waiting for meeting to discuss invoicing for 2 projects? An extension for what, Maria?
Invoice. I think we're waiting to discuss ARG2 and ARG3. We're waiting for a meeting.
Yes. Yes, you will not be submitting anything until those issues have been resolved. Or, I'm sorry, continue billing your WHO2. You cannot bill WHO3 until those issues are resolved. So you will not be billing cohort 3 at all.
Yes.
What happens if someone does not reveal that they've been enrolled in another ARG program? Well, I guess there's only so much you can do with that, right? But I would imagine that you guys are asking questions, and if someone is being referred, they're going to come with a referral. So, and 9 times out of 10, from what I understand about how you guys work, you guys are usually communicating with each other. Oh, I'm sending you somebody, you're shooting emails, different things like that. So if you guys are cross-referring to each other, you ought to be sending those notices to each other. Oh, I'm sending you someone for this, I'm sending you someone for that. So make sure that you guys are doing that piece. What did you mean by invoices 1 and 2 and monthly 1 through 6?
This is referring, so invoice 1 and 2 is if your organization was contracted as a quarterly reimbursement grantee. Monthly grantees would be up to invoice 6 now. So that's what Tanya means when we're saying 1 and 2, or if you're monthly 1 through 6.
Thank you, Danny. Can a day-to-day fiscal contact sign the invoice? No, that cannot happen, should not happen. The day-to-day fiscal is the person that prepares the invoice. The authorized financial officer is the person that signs and submits the invoice. Please make sure that you are adhering to that separation of duties. That is very, very important. And it is a requirement of your grant that you do have those 2 roles managing those 2 tasks separately. We created an attestation for our intake form and met with the grantee in our area to discuss process. I'm not sure what that's referring to. Diane, do you want to highlight on that, or?
Yes, so we have 2 other grantees that are funded ARG in our area. And so we met together and created an attestation to make sure that clients were doing our due diligence and asking them, are they getting services from our other 2 grantees that are funded here? And if so, if they say they're not, then they sign that attestation stating that they are not receiving services from the other 2 organizations.
Oh, nice.
That way we make sure we've done our due diligence and screening that they aren't receiving services with another org that's funded through VSCC.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. That's
You're
a great
welcome.
idea. That's a great idea. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So those are the tips for you on how to do if you are cross-referring with other ARG projects. Diane, there was a thing in the chat to ask if you would share what you created.
Sure, I can do that.
Maybe drop your email in the chat, and if anyone's interested, they can reach out to you directly.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Go ahead, Kelly, before I head into the rest of my housekeeping tidbits. You're muted again.
Just wanted to make sure I'm understanding. So if we are being referred a participant from someone who is already an ARG, who is already enrolled as an ARG in an ARG program, and they're coming to us, we mark them as a second enrollment, and then we only mark the services that they're getting. But then doesn't that mean that the number? No, never mind. I'm sorry. I answered my own question. I apologize. I just had to say it out loud.
No, sometimes talking it through out loud makes it click, so not a problem at all. Thank you so much. Okay, a couple of things for housekeeping. I just want to send some reminders out, make sure we're all on the same page. One, with the grantee contact sheet, please remember that you are to update your grantee contact sheet as changes are happening to your project, okay? One of the key things, especially as if you're having turnover or if you have additional project contacts listed, we will only communicate with the people that are on that grantee contact sheet. If you have not updated it and someone has left under less than stellar terms, and maybe that person has an axe to grind with your organization, you want to make sure that you're updating your contact sheet as changes are happening. I did have a project from cohort 1 have some issues pop up. They had a staff member who had access to all of the information. That staff member left under not so great of terms, and then started reaching out, trying to make changes to the information and documentation. So you really do want to pay attention to who has access to your BSCC grant information. So you do want to make sure that you are submitting those changes as they are happening and keeping that information up to date. Please remember to email the correct cohort mailbox, especially those of you who have multiple projects with us. Make sure that you are emailing the correct cohort mailbox. If you are a double winner, make sure that you are emailing separately for both of your projects. If you are a warm handoff winner and a rental assistance winner, do not email your invoices for RA and warm handoff in one email. Just like we want you to track them as separate projects, we track them as separate projects. If you send us one email that has all of your information for both of your projects, we cannot file them away appropriately. It is very important that you understand that you have to email separately for each project. You want to make sure that it's clear what project you are emailing for. Please remember to review the supporting documentation instruction. There's a worksheet that'll be in your OneDrive folder. There's the information in the virtual binder that Danny referenced a little bit earlier, the grant administration, your budget narrative. Make sure that you pull all of that out and review all of that information before you sit down to submit your invoice. Again, especially if you want to make sure that your invoice comes in well documented so that we can pay you faster. Also, items that require prior approval, please ensure that you are submitting your request for incentives or participant supports, as well as food and beverage before you submit invoices for those expenses. Now, let me clarify something here, because I think we might have some mix up in what needs to happen. Ideally, in a perfect world, you will send me your participant support form and all of that well in advance, and we'll be able to get things cleared and approved. However, that is not the way the world will always work, right? It does not mean that you cannot make those purchases and start that aspect of your program. However, you do need to understand that if it is not in your budget, if your budget does not clearly identify that you are providing participant support items such as work boots or clothing or bus passes and gift cards, if that is not clear in your budget narrative, do not start using participant supports or gift cards or incentives. You do want to make sure it's clear in your budget narrative. The second piece to that is, if you have not been able to get your participant support or your provider justification form approved before you gave me invoice one, you still need to make sure it comes in with invoice one. Otherwise, those expenses won't even be looked at, right? So we may not be able to formally approve it before you submit the invoice, but if we get that request along with the invoice, it still gives us a chance to review it. The thing to note there is, if you send us that with the invoice and that form is not filled out well, then you will have delays in getting that invoice approved, right? Because you got to have the participant form approved before we can approve those expenses. So the most important thing I can remind you all is that it's really important that you are very clear on how the documentation needs to come in, et cetera, to make sure that we are able to move these processes through a lot faster and smoother. And that was it. Those were it for my notes and tidbits. Hold on, let me check one more place. Yeah, those were it for my notes for my housekeeping tidbits. Marilu, the templates for cohort 3, all of that you'll find in the virtual binder. Natalia did drop that link in the chat. So if you scroll up in the chat, you'll see where Natalia put a link for the virtual binder or the orientation materials, which can be found on the BSCC, on the ARG webpage through the BSCC link. Okay. So last thing is a reminder that your invoices are due May 15th. Those of you who have fully executed contracts, if you do not have a fully executed contract, we are almost, we're close. I think we have a handful more that are going for final signature within the next week or so. So we're getting them moving. But invoices are due May 15th. If you are quarterly, it is invoices 1 and 2. If you are monthly, it is invoices 1 through 6. And those are due May 15th. Your progress reports are due May 15th. Disregard the monthly. We are not doing any monthly progress reports. That was my error. If you are If you are on monthly invoicing, you are still doing your progress reporting on a quarterly basis. So just make sure that you have that cleaned up in your brain and submit those to us on May 15th. And again, your local evaluation plan is due on May 1st. So that is next week. And again, Casey does have some office hours if you have questions on your LEP. Your next project call will be in the month of August. And I will get out a date to you, hopefully sooner than these came out. I'm planning travel for the summer, so I haven't picked August dates yet because I'm still planning my travel for the summer. Once that's cleaned up, you guys will get some dates sooner, hopefully rather than later. And that is it for my reminders. And are there any other questions before we close you out? Krishita, I think I said that right. If you have questions, please, if you need to talk about an extension, please do reach out, send us an email with whatever that request is. If we do not have expenses that we are billing for Q1, should we still submit an invoice? Yes. Even if it's zero, you have to submit an invoice for each quarter or each reporting period. So every invoice should come in. If you have no expenses to report, you will just put 0 in those columns and submit it. The next call is scheduled for August 29th on the agenda. No, don't go with that. Leave it as TBD. Sorry. Sorry for that confusion. Thank you for catching that though. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, I'm not quite sure if this is the platform to ask, but I'm gonna ask anyways. So we got a referral from someone from another state, but they live in our community. I just want to confirm they are not eligible. Are they eligible because they weren't a part of the California system, but they're living here now?
No, they had to have served time in a California Department of Rehabilitation. And yeah, they have to have spent time in CDCR. This is not for any person who's been in prison. They have to have served time in a CDCR facility.
That's what I thought, but I wanted to confirm.
Yes.
We're gonna just refer them to other services.
That is the key element to ARG funding. They have to have spent time in a CDCR facility, not a California jail. No, they have to have a history of incarceration in CDCR. That is your key component to being eligible for ARG funds. Awesome. Any other questions? If not, you guys have a fantastic week. Enjoy the weather. Spring is here full on. I'm excited to see the sun and enjoy some warmth. So you guys enjoy it yourselves, and we'll see you in 3 months.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
Tanya.
much.
Have a good one.